One of my favourite programmes of the last decade or so was the Channel 4 programme Time Team, a programme about archaeology where they went around the country and around Europe as well at times, digging things up in 3 days and finding what there was to discover about Roman Britain, about Tudor times, but also going back earlier to the Stone Age and the Bronze Age. And one of the things that's been really interesting in the last 150 years or so is the impact that archaeology has had in the world of theology and our understanding of Jesus and his times in Israel. In the 19th century, there were great archaeological explorations. One of the impacts of the Napoleonic Wars was that it opened up Egypt to European archaeologists and historians. It was in the 19th century when there was discovered the Rosetta Stone, which allowed archaeologists and linguists to finally decode the hieroglyphs of ancient Egypt and to be able to unpick ancient manuscripts and to understand far better the mindset, the philosophy, the sociology, and of course the theology of ancient peoples. Another great discovery, of course, at the time was that of the Dead Sea Scrolls. These were scrolls that had been set aside by a Jewish sect at the time of Christ, a little bit later, and which were discovered buried away in a cave. Those texts opened up a new area of study. Within those texts were very ancient copies of the books of the Old Testament, but also some books of the New Testament, some of the Gospel writings, and also some apocryphal writings also written by unnamed people and reflecting on the messianic hope that the Jewish people had in the coming of the Christ. Alongside these discoveries, there was, of course, renewed interest in the historical person of Jesus. Many people believed that the church's concentration of Jesus as the Christ of God had some way shrouded, even masked, the reality of Jesus as a human being. Our concentration on Jesus the Christ, the Logos of God, the one who pre-existed, the one through whom all things were made, somehow overwhelmed and disguised Jesus, the Son of Mary, the Jesus born in a stable in Bethlehem, the Jesus baptized by John in the River Jordan, the Jesus who went around Galilee and Jerusalem, the Jesus who was arrested, who was tortured, humiliated, crucified, and of course who rose again on the third day. For some people throughout history, confronting the reality of the cross has been something they've sought to avoid. Some people have tried to claim that the story of Jesus is a complete myth made up by someone for some purpose. It's never quite fully explained who or why. Other people have claimed that it wasn't Jesus who died, but some kind of substitute. At the far end of that spectrum, there are those who have claimed that Jesus was fully Christ, was fully divine and not human at all, and therefore was not subject to what was perceived to be the pain and the death of the cross. And yet, if that were not Jesus himself on that cross, and if Jesus himself was not fully human and fully divine, then the cross means nothing other than a symbol of human barbarity. And for some, that is simply what it is. For some, the cross and Jesus' death are symbols of a humanity which is vicious and cruel and totally depraved. And it's not as if we don't have many other examples of that. This week we have commemorated the 75th anniversary of the liberation of Belsen. And we've seen powerful reminders of the evil that human beings can perpetrate upon one another. We may also remember the killing fields of Cambodia and the piles of skulls. We might also recall the attack on the Twin Towers and those haunting pictures that went around the world. All of these and many more serve as outstanding symbols of humanity's hatred and cruelty. But of course, the cross doesn't just stand as a symbol of human barbarity, although it is, of course, all of that. It stands also as an example, as the supreme example of godly love. And the reason it stands as that example of godly love is because it wasn't simply a man who died upon the cross, but it was God. It was God who died for us. It was God who suffered pain and anguish. Most of the examples and arguments people use against the reality of the cross and of Christ's suffering have some element of truth about them. Some of you may remember that famous Time magazine article of 50 years ago, which posed the question, is God dead? They thought they were being outrageous and satirical. And yet, even in that argument, there is truth. Because today, on Good Friday, we remember that God did indeed die. He died not in pretense, not in appearance, but he died in the agony, sweat, and blood, in the isolation and humiliation, in the overwhelming horror of the cross. And in all that suffering, in all that darkness and pain, enduring the worst of human nature, the worst cruelty, the worst insults, the worst mockery, the worst ridicule, Jesus uttered the three words which resound in our ears and in our hearts and in our minds: Father, forgive them. And those three words, Father, forgive them, help us to realize that we can never see Jesus' crucifixion as a tragedy, the defeat of right by might, the sad end to a beautiful life, the anticlimax to a wonderful story. Today is Good Friday, where his death is a victory and his cross a triumph. In penitence, in faith, and in hope today, we claim that victory. We claim that truth. We claim Christ and pray that we may never, ever let go. Amen.